You're tuned in to This Week in Palestine, a space where truth isn't shaped to comfort the powerful, where resistance is not metaphor, but the rhythm of daily survival, and where solidarity is not a passing gesture, but a heartbeat carried across generations. From the heart of occupation, voices rise, not alone, not as whispers swallowed by empire, but together, in step with movements around the world that insist on justice, dignity, and liberation for all. This is more than a broadcast. It is a lifeline, a thread stretching from Palestine to every corner of the globe, binding shattered homes to unbroken hope, binding rubble to resolve, binding grief to a future still worth imagining. A reminder that even in the darkest nights, the flame of defiance refuses to fade. Each week, we bring reporting that refuses disguise, analysis that cuts through distortion, and reflections that center Palestinian life in all its depth, struggle, beauty, and humanity. We do not soften, we do not dilute, we speak with clarity, because the stakes are far too high for anything less than truth. We trace the architecture of power, the policies that suffocate, the narratives that erase, the forces that silence, and we follow their echoes across borders, from Ferguson to Jenin, from refugee camps to classrooms, from Gaza to the conscience of the world. This Week in Palestine is not a refuge for polite avoidance. It is testimony. It is urgency. It is solidarity without apology. Because the struggle for liberation is not confined to one land, one people, or one moment in time. It is shared, it is global, and it is sacred. Before we begin, a brief reminder. The views expressed in this hour belong to our hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of WZBC, Boston College, or its Board of Trustees. This is not a space for polite restraint. This is a space for truth spoken clearly, urgently, and without apology. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're listening from, thank you for joining us. I'm your host and narrator, Abby Masri, and you're tuned in to This Week in Palestine. Today is Sunday, February 8th, 2026. In this broadcast, we examine how political narratives are crafted, how they're used to discredit critics, and how they shape public understanding of the crisis in Palestine. We bring you a must-listen discussion between Candace Owens and Bassem Youssef that challenges Israel's ongoing violence and the machinery of Zionist propaganda. After that, we'll share a segment on China's warning that it would retaliate against Israel if Iran were attacked and destroyed. And through it all, our focus remains on Gaza and the West Bank, lands under siege, enduring what no people should ever endure. Homes reduced to rubble, lives uprooted under the weight of global indifference. Yet one truth remains. Palestinians continue to resist, even now, even as the threat of renewed violence looms. So we ask, when will the world confront the cost of its silence? When will conscience rise above convenience? Stay with us as we cut through the noise, as we lift up the resilient, as we hold space for truth that refuses to be buried. On Saturday, Israeli military airstrikes across Gaza killed at least 32 Palestinians, adding to the more than 509 Palestinians killed during what the world was told was a ceasefire in name only, a ceasefire that never reached the ground, never reached the families sheltering in shattered buildings, never reached the children sleeping under tarps, never reached the wounded waiting for medical care that no longer exists. And then, on Monday, the Rafah crossing to Egypt was partially opened, a gesture that was framed as humanitarian relief. But Israel announced it would allow only 150 Palestinians to leave Gaza each day. 150. An emergency medic put it plainly. At this rate, it would take over a year for the 20,000 awaiting evacuation to leave. A year for the sick, the injured, the elderly, the pregnant, the displaced. A year for people who do not have a year. A year for people who may not have a week. This is the reality on the ground as Israel's assault, what many scholars, jurists, and human rights organizations have called genocide, drags into its 28th month. 28 months of siege, bombardment, starvation, displacement, and the systematic destruction of a society. 28 months of a world watching, calculating, debating, and too often doing nothing. But this violence does not sustain itself on military power alone. It is upheld by political alliances, diplomatic cover, and perhaps most importantly, by the stories that are told about it. Stories that shape public opinion, stories that justify policy, stories that turn victims into threats and turn atrocities into self-defense. And nowhere has that complicity been more visible than in the Western media ecosystem, which has played a central role in maintaining U.S. political and military support for Israel's actions. Among the most glaring examples is the now thoroughly debunked New York Times story titled "Screams Without Words." This article, published with dramatic flair and presented as investigative journalism, claimed to uncover evidence of systematic sexual violence committed by Palestinians on October 7th. The story was immediately amplified by top U.S. officials from the White House to Congress and used to justify the continued flow of weapons, funding, and diplomatic protection to Israel. It became a talking point, a rallying cry, a moral shield for the slaughter of tens of thousands of Palestinian men, women, and children. But there was a problem. The story wasn't true. Not partially true, not misinterpreted, not in need of clarification. It was built on claims that collapsed under scrutiny. The New York Times relied on sources with clear political agendas, individuals with documented histories of fabricating or exaggerating claims, and testimonies that could not be verified. They ignored contradictory evidence. They sidelined their own internal fact-checkers. They published a narrative that aligned perfectly with the political needs of the moment, a narrative that framed Palestinians as monsters and framed Israel's actions as righteous retaliation. And once the story was out, it spread like wildfire. Cable news repeated it, politicians cited it, commentators used it to silence dissent, and the public absorbed it as fact. This is how propaganda works in the modern age, not through state-run newspapers or government decrees, but through respected institutions that carry the veneer of credibility. The New York Times is not a fringe outlet. It is not a blog. It is not a rumor mill. It is the paper of record, the publication that shapes global understanding of world events. And when it publishes a story, people believe it. But belief is not the same as truth, and the consequences of that belief have been catastrophic. Because while the New York Times was publishing unverified claims, Gaza was being bombed. While U.S. officials were citing the article, families were being buried under rubble. While commentators were using the story to shame anyone calling for a ceasefire, hospitals were being destroyed, children were starving, and entire neighborhoods were being erased. This is not an abstract media critique. This is about life and death. When a major newspaper publishes a false story that dehumanizes a population, it becomes easier for governments to justify violence against them. It becomes easier for the public to look away. It becomes easier for atrocities to continue. And this is not the first time. Not for the New York Times, not for Western media in general. We have seen this pattern before. We saw it in Iraq, when false claims about weapons of mass destruction paved the way for an invasion that killed hundreds of thousands. I actually believe the number exceeds 1 million. We saw it in Vietnam, when fabricated reports of attacks in the Gulf of Tonkin justified a war that lasted 2 decades. We saw it in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. Whenever U.S. interests aligned with violence, the media found a way to make that violence palatable. And now we are seeing it again in Palestine. The story Screams Without Words is not an isolated failure. It is part of a larger system, a system that protects power, not truth, a system that frames Palestinian resistance as terrorism, but frames Israeli occupation as security, a system that highlights Israeli fear, but erases Palestinian grief, a system that treats Israeli lives as precious and Palestinian lives as expendable, a system that demands Palestinians prove their humanity over and over again while never demanding accountability from the state that occupies them. And this system is not accidental. It is intentional. It is structural. It is political. Because narratives shape policy. Policy shapes action, and action shapes lives. When the New York Times publishes a story that paints Palestinians as violent, irrational, or barbaric, it becomes easier for the U.S. government to send more weapons. When cable news repeats Israeli talking points without question, it becomes easier for politicians to vote for more funding. When social media platforms suppress Palestinian voices, it becomes easier for the public to believe that Palestinians are silent because they have nothing to say, rather than because they are being silenced. And so the cycle continues. But here's the truth. Palestinians have been telling their stories for decades. They have documented their own history. They have recorded their own suffering. They have preserved their own memories. They have spoken again and again, even when no one was listening. And now, as the world watches Gaza burn, more people are finally hearing them. The debunking of Screams Without Words is not just about correcting a false story. It is about exposing the machinery behind it. It is about understanding how narratives are weaponized. It is about recognizing that truth is not simply reported, it is constructed, shaped, and sometimes manipulated. And it is about reclaiming the narrative from those who have used it to justify violence. Because the truth is this: Palestinians are not voiceless, they are silenced. Palestinians are not invisible, they are erased. Palestinians are not passive victims. They are resisting with their bodies, their voices, their memories, their stories. And as long as Western media continues to distort their reality, it is our responsibility to challenge those distortions, to question the narratives we are fed, to refuse to let lies become the foundation of policy. The New York Times may have published a false story. U.S. officials may have repeated it. Commentators may have weaponized it, but the truth remains, and the truth matters, because truth is the first step toward justice, and justice is the first step toward liberation. So as we continue airing our episodes, we will look deeper into how these narratives are constructed, how they spread, and how they shape the world's understanding of Palestine. We will examine the role of media in sustaining occupation. We will explore the consequences of misinformation, and we will center the voices that refuse to be silenced. Stay with us. Stay present. Stay critical. This is This Week in Palestine. Now we are going to listen to a conversation between Candace Owens and Bassem Youssef, two commentators who come from very different worlds, yet meet here with striking clarity. Candace Owens, a conservative American political commentator known for challenging mainstream narratives, has increasingly criticized U.S. foreign policy and the media's role in shaping public perception of Israel's actions. Bassem Youssef, the Egyptian satirist often called the Jon Stewart of the Arab world, brings sharp wit and moral urgency, using humor to expose hypocrisy and highlight the human cost of violence. Together, they deliver a blistering critique of Israel's ongoing assaults and the propaganda machinery that works to justify them. Their exchange is bold, unfiltered, and deeply relevant to this moment. Let's listen.
This is the problem. Israel always victimizes itself, and I have never seen a victim putting their oppressor under siege and bombing them 24/7. Israel wants you to believe that they are the victim. Dealing with Israel is so difficult. It's like being in a relationship with a narcissistic psychopath. He you up, and then he makes you think it's your fault. I have two questions. The question is, how can you justify the killing in the West Bank where Hamas does not exist? And if the disproportionate response during over all of these years have actually worked, what will be new this time that did not happen before? I just want to, that was my question.
I mean, it's brilliant. Just looking at it and going, wait a second, there's no Hamas there. Why are we just killing Palestinians for fun? And it was just brilliant. It genuinely was. It was brilliant.
Well, they're continuing. Like the Gaza war never ended. The ceasefire never happened. They killed more children since the ceasefire, more than Israeli kids were killed since 1948.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
That's incredible.
In 3 weeks, they killed more children from the Palestinian side, more than Israeli kids were killed all through 75 years.
Do you know what I always say to people, and it astonishes me that they can't think through this. If you think just because it's happening over there, like you're going to agree with these people, you're going to back these people up, you're going to maybe take a check, $7,000, maybe it's $100,000 to attack people that are standing up and saying this is wrong. But you can't be so dense as to think that they won't kill you too. That's what's mind-boggling. It's like you realize when they want America, they'll kill your kids too.
Isn't that happening also?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't like ICE has been trained by the IDF? Isn't that the same tactics that's used by ICE and used by many of the police departments? They get trained. They're actually one of the ICE offices. When they did like locations, like kind of, they found that the location of one of their field offices is in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
Why do we have ICE offices?
I think it was.
Well, Max Blumenthal calls this phenomenon the imperial boomerang, that the tactics the United States uses in military operations overseas and in regime change operations is turned back on the American populace through a police state. And, we saw that back as one of the worst ramifications of the war on terror, too, getting the DHS and the Patriot Act, an expansive surveillance state that's shredding the Fourth Amendment. And if you don't want to just take Max on the dissident left's view on that, take a look at what Michael Schellenberger has talked about in this regard, too, saying those same kind of psyops, the same sort of military tactics of psychological warfare have been turned inward. So that is true. As far as the Palestinians that have been killed since the ceasefire, he's right about that. I haven't checked the latest number, but Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com has been covering that very vigorously. And at one point, the last time I checked, it was over 500 Palestinians killed by Israel since the ceasefire. And we put the ceasefire in quotes because they're still doing a genocide. They're just carrying it out in different degrees and in different ways under the auspices of a current, tenuous peace that doesn't exist. It didn't address any of the problems. So I think there's a lot of truth in what they're saying here.
Department of Homeland Security.
That's kind of a couple of months ago. The ICE is just like a recent 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
So why are all of these American security entities are playing out from Tel Aviv? But the question is stupid because it's you have all of these billionaires, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, Larry Ellison. They just like they have a weird affair with Israel. They openly donate to the IDF. They openly have their headquarters in Israel. They pump huge amount of money. They use their technology in order to kill more Palestinians, and they use Palestinians as rat labs in order to test these AI advanced horrible lethal weapons. It's terrible. And now.
It absolutely is. That is being used. Palantir's AI software using algorithms to determine who lives and dies in Gaza. That is right. That's part of the PayPal mafia. That's part of Peter Thiel's company. With J.D. Vance has a very close association, having worked for Thiel in Mithril, his venture capital firm, forever. Bassam's also right about the fact that Larry Ellison's the biggest private donor to the IDF in the world. The Zionist that just took control of TikTok under his purchasing operation, and his family taking control of Paramount and CBS News. All this is right. This is the new campaign. It's a new war by Israel against the United States through psychological warfare and through the U.S. via military contractors like Palantir and CIA contractors to determine who lives and dies, how this genocide's carried out. I want nothing to do with it. It's ghastly. It's dreadful.
America is using it. America now is invading the world. And I have to tell you, as an immigrant, as a new immigrant in this country, I'm enjoying it. Wow. I'm for the first time, I'm on the side where history is happening to somewhere else. It is amazing.
Right.
I'm telling you, I'm kind of getting used to this feeling of being in a country that can do whatever the hell it wants with no consequences. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, I think that's overplaying it. We have immense consequences. More enemies overseas, a bigger surveillance apparatus. We have debt, destruction, a culture war playing out over the Israel-first relationship, especially on the right. The MAGA civil war is largely because of that. We have our civil liberties just being desecrated through what comes from these policies. So I don't think there's ever no consequences. There's the seen and unseen, and a lot of Americans are disconnected from it, but it plays into the financial system, our foreign policy, our domestic policy, psychological operations carried out by the deep state. All those things are ramifications. So I have to take exception with that a little bit.
It's amazing. I mean, I have this kind of, I don't know. It seems that people from the third world who came to country, their childhood trauma is now our country's foreign policy.
Sadly, yeah, sadly. And I just don't think people understand. You can't go halfway with a psychopath. And they don't feel anything. They kill people. If they kill a child and then you defend that, why do you think your kids are safe? I just don't understand the common sense of that.
I'm telling you, it is such a difference to live in a country like America that can invade half of the world and still host the Olympics.
I know.
They can go and invade your country, and then the next day it's like, I'm going to host the FIFA World Cup, and I'm going to deny your people the entry visa. That is like one huge boss level kind of control.
Yeah.
And now I'm actually happy that that's happening to Denmark, and then we're going to get Greenland. Because now I know it's not about brown people.
Yeah, it's I don't even know what we're doing anymore. And I'm like, I got behind Trump. We're supposed to do no new wars, and then it's like Bibi's like, here's what you're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Yeah. Obviously, look, he took Miriam Adelson's money, and so I don't even pay attention to it anymore.
I'm just happy.
Yeah, with Greenland, it doesn't seem like that's going to be acquired. And by the U.S. has every right, according to an agreement set up in, I believe, 1951 with Denmark. The U.S. can rebuild bases at any time. We were throwing lots of propaganda about how the U.S. needs it. We need to take Greenland. Otherwise, China or Russia will take it tomorrow. All this nonsense. My biggest fear is that isn't over. That situation isn't over whatsoever, and that European leaders will actually pressure Denmark to give Greenland to the United States in return for a U.S. security agreement for Ukraine, which is exactly what the neocons and globalists in the EU want, to keep the U.S. embroiled in that proxy war for generations to come, on the backs, of course, of the American taxpayers in a military theater thousands of miles away that, again, doesn't concern us whatsoever.
Because now I know that America doesn't see color, it sees opportunity.
It
doesn't hate like Muslim people, it just hate underutilized land.
Well, I mean, clearly.
Do you think like America is now like, I mean, like the
But
word?
it's not even America.
America is like the HOA of the word. It's like we see that we cannot use it.
It's
I think
not
we should
true.
give it to us.
I promise you, it is not America. We might have been brainwashed, but this is very clearly like an Israeli empire. And LBJ murdered JFK, got his boys in there, and took over our military. And everything else is just noise and Hollywood and manipulation. And now it's cracking. And now people are looking up and going, wait, why are we being so controlled? Why are our kids being led to believe that they have to support Zionism? Why am I not allowed to make a decision about whether I think this or think that? The fake algorithm, pretending that people are popular when they're not. And so the mass awakening has them a bit panicked. They're making a lot of mistakes right now. Case in point, going after Miss Rachel seems like an unbelievable mistake. But I do think the biggest threat to their empire is the awareness. And that's why they're like sloppy. Like, we're just going to buy TikTok. I don't think the money is the real power. The illusion, the trick was actually the illusion. We all believed they were the victims. We watched the movies. We were in the classroom. We bought into the 9/11 rhetoric. The danger for them is when all of a sudden it go 330 million people, if that's something in America now, wake up and go, wait a second. I actually think what you're doing is pretty horrific. What's their next move?
I'll tell.
Yeah, I mean, that is what is at the heart of this thing. It is desperate moves by the Israel lobby, by the Zionists, in response to the fact that they know that their timeline is running out. The American right is waking up to this, really for the first time, questioning the Israel first attachment that is just so pervasive in our government, in Congress, in the presidency, in the deep state, what have you, is that these tactics right now are being utilized as psychological warfare to try to recapture what is clearly being lost. And that timeline, to have such a Israel-centric government, does seem to be closing. That window seems to be closing. And that's why in 10 years, I don't think the Israel lobby will be as, forceful in American politics. Now, at some point, they will be, and the U.S. populace is definitely disconnected from the political class. There'll still be rich Zionist donors funding it, but the political capital won't be there in the same way because so many of us have rejected it. Many of us have long rejected it, and then some people have rejected it in the last few years. That is causing this erratic behavior. The Miss Rachel thing just puts it right up in the forefront. It's almost like Stop Anti-Semitism, that X account that promoted Miss Rachel as a finalist in Anti-Semite of the Year award race, which, by the way, Tucker Carlson won this year, Candace Owens won last year, is the best way to get people to just turn away and see the nonsense for what this is, that you're going to smear Miss Rachel for saying, hey, I'm against people being killed, children being killed, and that includes Palestinians. Oh, imagine that. That includes Palestinians. That's anti-Semitic. It's insane what these people will do.
Tell you, American citizens now are waking up to the fact how easy it is to go from a first world country citizen to a third world country citizen. Because here's the difference. People in the developed world, in Africa and Asia and Latin America, we all know. We know the people in power, they're corrupt. The people in power, they are terrible. They have all kinds of bad things happening, but we cannot speak up because it's too dangerous. So we shut up, but everybody knows. In America, everybody knows and everybody can talk. You can talk, but we dare you to change anything. So you vote, you talk, you protest, you go online. Nobody will put you in jail. You feel like you participated, but the end result is nothing changes. They look at you and say, yes, we like the Epstein files. Yeah, there's victims. Nothing will happen. You have evidence. You have evidence about Epstein. Every single TV show, every single comedy show is making fun of it, but nothing is really moving forward. You see the difference? Yeah, I'm giving you this margin of liberty, but do you think you can do anything with the liberty? What if Trump tomorrow decides he's going to run for a third term? What will happen? What, a federal judge will just like put some... What will happen? What, you're going to get the military to remove him from office? What will prevent them from kind of enforcing martial laws or starting to take your liberties? We have to, because the world has been desensitized by how much violence that happened in the Middle East, that now people are kind of like they are desensitized. It can happen to us anytime now, and
do you think that they're going to do it?
I mean, you said that what is the next thing? We have seen this, we've seen what they can do on the level of the universities, because like 3 years ago, you wouldn't even imagine that American university will be having the same treatment that we see in brutal dictatorship that would justify military intervention. We have seen people losing their jobs, losing their careers, being beaten, being arrested, being shot, having NYPDs and LAPDs having Israeli special operations officers on site with them. What would prevent them from doing that outside of the university campus?
Well, not much. If it's willed by the deep state, it's willed by the bureaucratic apparatus, which really seems to be the real government, that Congress has deferred so many of its responsibilities under the Constitution, under the original intent of the Constitution, to bureaucratic agencies and the president to wage war in other countries, to, conduct psychological operations, even to impose tariffs unilaterally, certainly not under the vision of the founding fathers, to enact the biggest welfare state in the world in terms of dollars spent, not in per capita. I think France has that distinction, but in terms of the biggest welfare state in the world, no constitutional impetus for that whatsoever. There was a time that, the United States government knew that they had to produce, say, an amendment allowing for prohibition of alcohol. They don't even pretend that when it comes to hard drugs. Suddenly they have the supposed ability to curtail, marijuana usage in every state, still reserving that power and the enforcement mechanisms for that. Thankfully, they're not sending in the tanks into Washington, but they still maintain, hey, it's illegal for you to cultivate pot. The point I'm getting to here is the government's far out of control. And it's not just Trump, it's previous presidents too. We've been under a totally illegitimate government since at least the progressive era, and arguably since the end of the Civil War, where we have central banking schemes, a warfare state where undeclared wars are the norm. And to even mention the fact that there's a constitutional limitation there just invites laughter from representatives and laughter from Trump about whether or not he has to get Congress's opinion on that. We're so out of control here that I don't know that this is changeable from within the government. In fact, I'm very sure it's not changeable from within the federal government. That's why I believe localities have to push back against the egregious, immoral, and unconstitutional mandates of the feds. And ideally, I'd like the communities to do that against the states, and neighborhoods to do that against the communities, down to the individual level where we have the most rights and most control over the world around us.
You see, it is the same thing happening, but you're moving very slowly there because the moment that they lose control, when there's no more TikToks to buy, there's no more HBOs or CNN to buy, there's no more ways to put in them, you will find that system becoming more and more brutal.
You think so? So I would say they do seem to be becoming more brutal, but they're also becoming brutally stupid. Meaning that, okay, so the goal with having people go in there and, we're going to drag you out, you're going to get kicked out of the country because you said something at Israel, has just made my generation go, okay, we're not going to send our kids there. But the power wasn't us sending our kids there and then brainwashing our kids. Like, you actually need the kids there to believe in the illusion. So as soon as you start letting us know that there's actually no freedom and that these are actually little indoctrination centers that are being run by Israel, and we're now speaking to our kids coming up about what Israel is, you are fighting to lose to lose the control that you have. Same thing with speech, right? As soon as Larry Ellison and all of them are out there like, we need to buy TikTok, do you think that made TikTokers pro-Israel or anti-Israel? Like, does it actually work long term to say, well, we've got the power. Okay, it's power versus the people. Do you think power wins, or are the people going to win?
Oh, I think she's just so on fire there at the end. I think Candace is totally right about saying that, yeah, the tactics of the Zionists and the Israel lobby are getting more brutal, but in the process of getting more brutal and more iron-handed, they're also becoming more brutally stupid in so many ways. The Miss Rachel thing we talked about earlier exemplifies that, but there's other stuff. It's, having Randy Fine go into these major Jewish conferences and say that Tucker Carlson's the most dangerous anti-Semite in the world. it's almost like, in a way, he's colluding with the anti-Zionist critics on that because of how absurd that comes off as to everyday Americans that just don't buy that whatsoever and actually laugh at that and realize how absurd that is and how far that the word anti-Semitism has just been tarnished, much like racism and sexism and homophobe, where everyone that you didn't like was just called those names, hey, say 5 years ago. Now it's just you're an anti-Semite. If you're critical of Israel, and not even critical of Israel sometimes, if you're just critical of America's attachment to Israel and any of the things that flow from that, the subsidies, the military intelligence, the alignment in terms of foreign policy, you're just smeared as an anti-Semite. I think more and more people are starting to see through that. People are getting wiser. People that watched Tucker Carlson's interview with Ted Cruz saw that, when literally he said, I made it my chief prerogative when entering the Senate to be the most pro-Israel senator in the government, and then had the gall to accuse Tucker Carlson of talking so much about Israel, that he's obsessed with Israel. No, it's your attachment that's obsessed with Israel, making that quite clear in the same interview, and all of your voting and decisions in terms of our government flow from that obsession. Us noticing that is downstream from their obsession, from the obsession in the government, in AIPAC, in the Israel lobby, the obsession of Miriam Adelson to buy off these politicians and sink their talons into every aspect of policy, and not just foreign policy, the intent to rewrite state-level laws, state-level statutes on hate speech to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So people that are critical of Israel and this foreign government that's not even our own state gets you smeared as an anti-Semite, even codified into law, making you an anti-Semite under these hate speech laws. It's pernicious. It involves the shredding of the First Amendment, every value of free speech that people are supposed to love, but definitely don't when it comes to these attachments. And the prioritization of Israel above all other things is just so easy and obvious to see for the people following this stuff. It gets more and more obnoxious. I'm frustrated just following it sometimes, but I can't imagine what it's like when, you're just paying attention to your family. You're just trying to feed your family and have a better life, strike out on your own, be entrepreneurial. And all your government talks about is prioritizing the foreign nation, a genocidal country in the Middle East, Israel, funding its genocides, making excuses for its mass killing sprees, for the expansion of the West Bank settlements, for what's going on in Gaza. It's a ceasefire, right? They're still killing Palestinians. And now they have the U.S. roped into another potential regime change operation in Iran. Bomb Iran. That's what Netanyahu wants, and he'd like to do that if it involves U.S. boots on the ground too, so he doesn't have to commit his own boys and girls. He'd rather have them help carry out the genocide in Gaza and the expansion of Israel under the Greater Israel Project. That's what he'd like. So that's what we're in for. I really enjoyed this discussion with Candace Owens and Bassem Youssef. I'm not that familiar with Bassem, so maybe I have to check him out a little bit more.
Now we will focus on the YouTube video titled China Vows to Wipe Out Israel If Iran Attacked and Destroyed. The video discusses claims circulating online that China has issued a severe warning to Israel amid rising tensions with Iran. It frames China as threatening massive retaliation if Israel were to launch a devastating attack on Iran, highlighting Beijing's strategic partnership with Tehran and its criticism of Israeli military actions. While the video uses dramatic language, it reflects broader geopolitical anxieties about how a regional conflict could escalate into a confrontation involving major world powers, and how China's growing influence shapes the balance of power in the Middle East. Let's listen. You are listening to This Week in Palestine, Truth and Justice Radio, WZBC, Boston College.
Hello, it's your friend CJ Werleman, And in this episode, we'll look at China's vow to counter American and Israeli aggression around the world. In a recent tweet, I asked whether Trump's invasion of Venezuela lit a match for a US-China war, given Beijing was the South American country's #1 oil customer. A move that puts the United States in almost total control over the world's oil reserves, given the US effectively rules the Persian Gulf and Red Sea through its Arab and Zionist puppet regimes. This has caused China's energy anxiety to spike upwards, remembering that more than 50% of its oil and gas imports come from US allies in the Middle East, making Beijing feel completely boxed in by American-Israeli aggression and imperialism. Which is why Beijing is vowing retaliation against any country that supports US efforts to isolate China economically.
The United States has brazenly resorted to the use of force against Venezuela and demanded that America First be applied when Venezuela disposes of its own oil resources. This is a typical act of bullying, a serious violation of international law, and a grave infringement on Venezuela's sovereignty that also severely undermines the rights of Venezuelan people. China strongly condemns this.
They say those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, a warning that the Zionist-American alliance seems determined to ignore. Call it arrogance, call it hubris, call it whatever you want. But similar moves against Japan in the 1930s ignited the Second World War in the Western Pacific.
Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? U.S. oil embargo. The U.S. cut off Japan's access to oil, steel, and other resources in response to Japan's invasion of China and expansion in Asia. Japan needed these resources for its military. Expansion goals. Japan wanted to dominate Asia and the Pacific, the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, without U.S. interference.
China opposes the use of force in international relations, but it also stated that it will not hesitate to deploy its military power if its strategic interests are directly threatened. But for now, it's using its power and influence to launch a campaign to expel Israel from the United Nations. Put simply, Israel and the United States are fooling themselves if they don't believe Beijing won't retaliate for toppling the Iranian regime, which provides China with more than 80% of its shipped oil, therefore making US Israeli-led regime change efforts in Iran an existential threat to the Chinese economy, leaving Beijing with no other choice than to send weapons and missile defense systems to Tehran. Nothing I'm saying here should be misinterpreted as tacit support for the Chinese government, because not only has its foreign ministry threatened me in public, calling me an anti-China propagandist, but also it has targeted me and my family with threats and harassment in retaliation for exposing evidence of China's criminal abuse of Uyghur Muslims throughout its network of concentration camps in Xinjiang. So, when I talk about China or the United States, I'm merely calling balls and strikes. And the state of the game is this. Beijing has reached breaking point over the unrestrained military aggression of the United States and Israel during the past 2 years.
Since the start of the current Gaza conflict, the Palestinian people have been deeply mired in suffering. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, among others, are witnessing escalating tensions, and even Qatar has come under attack. The mounting conflicts and volatility in the Middle East have worsened the global security environment, dampened the economic outlook for the world, and ran counter to the common interests of the international community. It is
To counter Zionist expansionism, which is underwritten by American firepower, China is not only calling for the arrest of Netanyahu and rallying international support against the US-Israeli alliance, but also quietly transferring its latest weapons technologies to Tehran, specifically those that improve the Persian state's air defense capabilities, as per its recent acquisition of China's HQ-9B surface-to-air defense system, which came just days after Israeli and American warplanes bombed Iranian nuclear sites in June of last year, marking a massive turning point in Iran's post-war air defense strategy. This has far-reaching implications for Israel, the United States, and the evolving balance of power in the Middle East.
Now to the topic. China's air defense system threatens to take down Israeli aircraft without even being detected on radar. It combines features from Russia's S-400 and America's Patriot system, with the addition of some seriously advanced Chinese tech. It's the only system in the world capable of enforcing an airspace lockdown that's nearly impossible to breach. It has ultra-fast, super-accurate radars. Netanyahu himself is worried about his jets flying anywhere near its range. Planes that can avoid radar detection still get hit by its missiles, and survival chances are basically zero.
China giving Iran the tools to knock American F-35s and Israeli F-15s out of the sky is why Trump and Netanyahu called off their planned attack against Iran in early January. Israeli and American attack plans received another blow on the 20th of January when 16 Chinese military cargo planes were reported to have landed in Iran during a 56-hour period, which was preceded by the arrival of another cargo plane in Tehran just 4 days earlier.
Over just 3 days, not one, not two, 16 military cargo aircrafts are reported to have landed in Iran. Not commercial planes here, not humanitarian flights, heavy military transports, and here's the detail that is raising the eyebrows. They don't land at known civilian airports. They reportedly touch down at restricted, high-tech locations. Some say a secret base maybe. Now ask the obvious question, who sent them? Well, the reports point just at one direction, that is China. But you know why this moment is so sensitive? Because this moment comes at the exact time when the US-Iran tensions are peaking. American warships are moving closer. Washington is openly discussing regime pressure, and Iran is warning of retaliation as well.
China is no longer sitting quietly on the sidelines because it knows that it can't afford to lose any more of its oil and gas suppliers to the lawless military actions of the Israeli and US governments, which together have stupidly pushed the Chinese military juggernaut into a metaphorical corner, making military confrontation inevitable in the near future as a more assertive Beijing shows a willingness to confront Israel on diplomatic terrain today.
China is calling on Israel to halt its military strikes on Iran, warning of serious consequences if tensions continue to escalate. In a rare rebuke at the UN Security Council, Beijing condemned what it calls violations of Iranian sovereignty. Following Israel's Operation Rising Lion, a wave of preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear and military sites, with retaliatory strikes already hitting Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the risk of a broader Middle East conflict is rising. This may derail diplomatic efforts and strain global energy markets.
It's for this reason Zionist-controlled media outlets are sounding the alarm for a likely war against China. But on this occasion, the US and Israel have genuine reasons to be concerned, given Beijing is using grey zone tactics to confront the United States and its allies in the Western Pacific. This animation by the New York Times shows how China has quietly mobilized thousands of fishing boats in recent weeks to form massive floating barriers of at least 200 miles long, showing a new level of coordination that gives Beijing more ways to threaten and intimidate US allies, while cutting off or restricting their access to vital shipping and trade routes. Now, we aren't talking about your typical run-of-the-mill fishing boat here. We are talking about a key component of China's maritime militia that operates as a third sea force alongside the Navy and Coast Guard, blending civilian appearance with military function to project power, harass foreign vessels in disputed waters, conduct grey zone operations, and practice large-scale maneuvers for potential conflicts, often using dual-purpose vessels with military features, including 50-cal machine guns, water cannons, and reinforced hulls.
Everything suggesting peaceful fishing fleet. Reality, armed paramilitary force, maritime militia, each vessel, reinforced hull, military communications, hidden weapon systems, crew, former PLA Navy personnel, military trained, combat experienced. Orders from Beijing: harass American destroyer, interfere with operations, create dangerous situations, force course alterations, demonstrate Chinese control South China Sea. Mission: gray zone warfare, below military conflict threshold, above peaceful operations, strategic ambiguity, plausible deniability.
Confrontation in the Middle East and confrontation in the Western Pacific. Beijing knows that the United States can't fight effectively on two fronts so far away from home, whereas China has already made the South China Sea near impenetrable for US forces, as evident in a number of recent US war games, which consistently show the United States suffering significant losses and even defeat in a potential conflict with China over Taiwan, due to China's advanced missile systems, overwhelming numbers of short-range missiles, and China's ability to quickly inflict catastrophic damage on US aircraft carriers and forces before US air power can fully engage.
A war game from the Center for Strategic and International Studies begins with a Chinese missile barrage against Taiwan's military in 2026, destroying much of its air force and navy, followed by an amphibious invasion across the Taiwan Strait. Taiwanese forces fight back using advanced U.S. weaponry, Patriot missiles for air defense, anti-ship missiles and torpedoes for sea defense, and its ground forces to defend the beachheads.
Whatever the Taiwanese are going to fight the war with, they have to have that when the war begins.
In every scenario, China landed forces on Taiwan. The war game assesses that the U.S. loses 10 to 20 combat ships, including 2 aircraft carriers, and 200 to 400 military aircraft. In 3 weeks of fighting, the U.S. suffers more than 3,000 troops killed in action. That's about half of what the U.S. suffered in Iraq and Afghanistan over 2 decades. America's global position is damaged for years.
A single miscalculation here or a poorly executed gamble there will bring a catastrophic war to the region, constituting a sobering reality given threats, encounters, and near misses between the two superpowers occur on a near daily basis.
Just into CNN, U.S. defense officials releasing this video. Take a look. This is a Chinese fighter jet coming within 10 feet of a U.S. B-52 bomber that was flying over the South China Sea. So, Natasha, what more are you hearing from officials on this?
Well, Boris, this was a really close call, and it's something that U.S. defense officials say is happening with increasing regularity over the South China Sea as Chinese pilots take what they have called aggressive and coercive maneuvers against U.S. aircraft that are flying in international airspace in that area.
Israel, which has become drunk and delusional over its modest military power and radicalized by the biblical story of David versus Goliath, is now threatening the Goliath that is China, prompting this fierce response from the Chinese government.
If you want to have war, you will get war. If you want to destroy China, you will be destroyed. If you want to impose nuclear war on China, you will be wiped out by nuclear war. This is very serious. China's policy is very clear. China will not fire the first shot, but China will not allow you to fire the second shot.
Zionist and American aggression and arrogance has literally kicked over a Chinese hornet's nest, with Beijing ready to abandon its long-standing policy of rejecting foreign military intervention. If or when Israel and/or the United States strike Beijing's ally in Iran again, then Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C. should expect vicious retaliation from the Chinese military superpower, one that may very well bring about a sudden end to American empire and the Greater Israel Project. Which means there's never been a more opportune time to drive the final nail into Israel's coffin before Israel drives another into ours.
And with that, we close this week's episode. As always, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep asking the questions that unsettle power, cut through silence, and move us closer to justice. I'm Abby Mosseri, your host and narrator. It has been a profound honor to share this space with you, a space where truth is spoken without hesitation, where resistance is held with reverence, and where solidarity is never conditional and never up for negotiation. If you have reflections or questions, or if you feel called to step behind the mic as a future host, we welcome your voice. Reach us anytime at twippodcasts@gmail.com. To our listeners, thank you. Thank you for your time, your trust, and your willingness to walk this difficult road with us. And to the remarkable team whose dedication keeps this platform alive: Bob Funk, Stanley Robinson, Stephen Lowe, Sophia Rose Woolman, Tahani Abu Musa, Dr. Bethany Marks, Dr. Rana Awad, Professor Yara Rashid, Juliette Salame Olivier, Reynad Al Ghul, and our editor Mohammed Al Ghul. Your labor, your spirit, and your unwavering commitment are the heartbeat of this show. Each week you remind us that storytelling is more than a craft. It is an inheritance of struggle and devotion. It is resistance. It is care. It is collective memory. Until next time, keep walking toward truth. Keep walking toward Palestine. This Week in Palestine is a production of Truth and Justice Radio, proudly broadcasting for more than 20 years from WZBC Student Radio at Boston College. If you missed this radio hour, you can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podcast Index, iHeartRadio, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Pocket Casts, Deezer, Listen Notes, Overcast, Castro, Castbox, Player FM, Good Pods, and True Fans. You can also explore over 2 decades of archives on radioforall.net and archive.org. Simply search for This Week in Palestine or TWIP and look for the image of the little girl raising her hands in the victory gesture. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Until then, take care. Stay steadfast. Free Palestine. Philistine Huda.
They came with fire, they came with lies, tore our homes from the earth and the skies, stole the fields where our children once ran, buried our names in the dust of the land. They took our plates and called them their own. Our streets, our songs never named unknown. They wrote new books with ink made of shame, but the wind still whispers our ancestors' names. But the wind still whispers our ancestors' names. Oh, you can fake the past, you can hide the truth, but every stone remembers our youth. The sea still hums our lullabies, the olive trees won't forget our cries, the air still carries our stories untold. This land is ours, it won't be sold. It won't be sold. Look at their houses and land stolen from us, windows that once held our mother's dreams. They changed their names to sound like they're from here, but the earth knows strangers when they're near. 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 Ask the birds who sung here for years, ask the waves that have dried our tears. The rocks still bear our children's scars, the moon still knows whose land we are. Ask the birds who sung here for yours. Oh, you can fake the past, you can hide the truth, but every stone remembers our youth. The sea still hums our lullabies, the olive trees won't forget our cries, the air still carries our stories untold. This land is ours, it won't be sold. It won't be sold. So dig up our roots, pave over our graves, build your walls, spread all your hate, but the land breathes us in its face. But the land breathes us in its face. They came with fire, they came with lies, tore our homes from the earth and the skies, stole the fields where our children once ran, buried our names in the dust of the land. They took our plates and called them their own. Our streets, our songs never named unknown. They wrote new books with ink made of shame, but the wind still whispers our ancestors' names. But the wind still whispers our ancestors' names. Oh, you can fake the past, you can hide the truth.